Hey guys, how's it going? Delrith here, bringing you another rapid-fire style review, this time for the World of Warcraft expansion, Battle for Azeroth. Battle for Azeroth, and World of Warcraft, of course, is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game designed and maintained by Blizzard Entertainment. It features the Warcraft universe that was mostly made popular by the original Warcraft RTS series. I'd also like to get it out there that I'm not new to World of Warcraft. I've played several hundred hours each expansion and ended up doing mythic rating progression a good number of times to build up enough experience and familiarity to review this effectively. One final thing too, it's obvious in the footage being used in the background that I use various UI mods. Don't freak out about them, they didn't change any of the core gameplay mechanics. Nobody's gonna argue that the default UI for WoW is kinda basic and dated, and there's really no harm in making it look better. The basic gist of the story is that BFA starts off right after the previous events of the expansion Legion, after a giant titan decided to shove a massive sword into the planet, pretty much resulting in starting a doomsday situation for Azeroth. You, as a hero, must make every effort possible to stop the spreading of a new material called Azerite, like the actual blood of the planet or some junk, and heal the planet to prevent all life from dying out. It's a pretty simple concept, right? This Azerite ore stuff is also immensely powerful, resulting in the two main factions, the Alliance and the Horde, to go back to major war against each other and fight for control of this new and valuable resource, something you get directly involved in throughout the storyline. So how does this expansion look when compared to the previous expansions? How does it look and sound in general? The answer to this, in my opinion, is absolutely fucking fantastic. This is without a doubt the best looking content created for World of Warcraft to date, and it is without a doubt the best thing that the BFA expansion has to offer. For this expansion, Blizzard went and designed separate leveling areas for both the Horde and the Alliance. Each leveling area consists of 3 zones, which are entirely unique in design, and each with a separate theme. All 6 areas are clearly handcrafted and have an immense amount of effort put into them, resulting in an extremely satisfying visual experience throughout the game. Character, NPC, and mob models are also impressive, at least for World of Warcraft standards, with dozens upon dozens of new creatures and humanoids made for the purpose of keeping things interesting while playing. My personal favorites were the designs they went for with the Zandalari and the Proudmoore factions, both entirely unique and almost complete opposites of one another. The Zandalar are inspired from ancient Mayan or Aztec or Incan culture and are blended together with a lot of gold, while the Proudmoore Armada look like militarized pirates. The dungeons, too, are easily the best looking, in my opinion, that have ever been in the game. Waycrest Manor and Tol Dagor both come to mind, visually stunning by WoW standards and entirely unique in their own right. Every time I went back in, I found myself looking for new areas and discovering interesting things, all motivated by just how damn good everything looked. I have to say, given the fact that the game and the engine are around 13 or 14 years old now, I didn't expect them to be able to continue improving the visuals in such a way. You can easily see the vast differences in quality by doing BFA and then heading back to any of the old content. The improvement is definitely there. They also went out of their way to add a lot of quest cinematics which utilize the in-game models and are competently put together. What really shines though is the soundtrack of the expansion as a whole. I have no issue in stating that, to me, BFA has the best tracks of any expansion to date. On top of that, Blizzard went in and made it dynamic music, something that was done extremely well. I struggled to actually find a theme or two that I did not like in the expansion, listening to the entire soundtrack and enjoying every moment of it. I love going into combat with bosses and dungeons and getting to hear a theme specific to them. I enjoyed going into dungeons and listening to 2 or 3 different themes each one had, the music itself shifting when you got into a different and new area. This happened in the open world portions too, making the audio experience the best it has ever been. I fully encourage anyone who plays BFA to turn their music up above their normal sound. I don't think you'll regret it at all. I gotta now talk about the first, problem I ran into with Battle for Azeroth, the leveling experience as a whole. To put it as simply as I can, the Horde leveling was the most generic and boring experience that I've had to date in World of Warcraft. The Alliance one was a decent amount better, but both of them suffered from the same problems, the Horde's just being the far more shallow one of the two. This isn't to say that the leveling from 110 to 120 was awful, but it wasn't good either. I was neither entertained nor bored, and honestly, even though it was relatively quick, about 8 or 9 hours or so if you went at a decent pace, I couldn't find myself to do it over again a third time. Sure, as I said, the leveling zones themselves looked and sounded great, but the actual questing part of them was extremely rinse and repeat. Every single quest area consisted of you killing a few mobs and gathering a few things, killing an elite or name mob, and then moving on to the next area and repeating. In previous expansions, Blizzard at least tried to diversify this by adding interesting missions with unique mechanics, but in this one I'd say about 95% of the quests played the same. I found myself just sort of drifting through the quests and not really getting invested in all what was happening. Of the 2 experiences experiences, like I said, the Alliance leveling zones were definitely better, but that isn't to really say that they were fantastic in any capacity. I also don't think that it helped that you were immediately detached from this huge war that the entire expansion was themed around, being tasked with building relationships with factions so that eventually later on they'd get involved in the war themselves. It was kind of like, oh hey, our planet is dying and we're in a major war with each other. Go talk to the turtle people and earn their trust while the big boys go out and deal with the war. I guess battling for Azeroth means hanging out and doing chores for turtles and pirates or fox people. Yeah, freaking fox people. I don't know, it just made it incredibly average. In previous expansions, at least you had this overall bad guy you were dealing with throughout the leveling. Wrath had Arthas, Pandaria had the Shah, Draenor had Gul'dan and junk, and Legion had the motherfucking Burning Legion. You got to go around into these zones and see how the big baddie was directly affecting each faction or area. It made you feel invested in wanting to bring resolution to the problem. I really wish that this would have been the case here throughout leveling. It all felt like build-up to a major conflict that you don't get to experience yet, something that is like 3 or 4 weeks out by now. All in all, like I said, this resulted in a stupidly average leveling experience for me. This was definitely not a strong point of the expansion, and I'm hoping later on that the added quest chains and war-related material is better and does more for the game as a whole. It just isn't that memorable so far. If I were to offer suggestions on a fix, it would be for the content you're doing while leveling to be entirely focused on the appeal of the expansion and not just feel like a side job, but that's just me. We also have to talk about the allied races they added to the game as an appeal to the expansion. They're neat in theory, but the problem is if you didn't play Legion, you have to go back and do a month or more of grinding to hit Exalted with the factions themselves to unlock them as a playable race. This to me is extremely stupid. Part of the appeal of a new expansion and new races is to make the new character and level in the new zone as that race. The fact that you don't get any of the races as a baseline for buying the game is ridiculous. I think it's far too punishing to returning players and needs to be made far more readily accessible. And on to the innovation and gameplay changes that Blizzard brought to the table with BFA. First on the list, notably, is the addition of a unique amulet called the Heart of Azeroth that every player gets when they embark upon their journey through BFA. This is pretty much identical to the artifact system that Legion had. It's an item that you need to power up through a separate experience system involving Azerite that not only increases its power level, but allows you to use stronger and stronger gear. I'm just going to straight out say this, I absolutely fucking hate this system. I fully understand and get why they added it to keep people playing and grinding every day, but it just sucks. The most disliked thing in all of Legion to most was the artifact power grind that you had to do and sit through to be competitive or viable in a dungeon or raiding situation, and Blizzard decided that they were not only going to bring that back, but tie it into being able to use the gear you get from doing content and progression. The secondary grind just isn't enjoyable to me. It feels like a forced carrot on a stick mechanic that is just making people do boring daily quests, spam dungeons, or do expeditions to very slowly grind up and stay relevant. The moment that a mechanic starts feeling like a chore is when you know you screwed up in your design. If I had to make a suggestion, it would be to either speed it up so it doesn't feel like a grueling task or get rid of it completely. I don't think a grind like that should be based on experience that you earn, but rather maybe your accomplishments and progress, giving you things for reaching a certain point like completing a heroic raid, not doing chore-like activities all day. And with this amulet came Azerite gear, pieces of gear that have traits or talents on them that directly affect your damage and survivability. The idea behind these Azerite traits, on paper, is that they would directly change how classes play and open up a lot of opportunities for you to mix and match and really customize your playstyle. In reality, most of them are, at current, utterly useless, and there's really only a handful that you'd ever want. You would think that the traits and upgrades that were class-specific would be the ones that people choose, but depressingly the best ones in the game at current are the really generic ones that every class gets. I think this can actually be blamed on the fact that even though there were multiple months of beta testing of these traits and BFA in general, Blizzard decided to, at the last minute, dump a dozen or so more traits into the game on the armor, resulting in massive imbalances. This is definitely going to be something that they work on and resolve over the next few months. I just feel like it should have been done at launch, but that's just my opinion. Oh yeah, as a side note, Blizzard removed the Master Looter option from raiding in dungeons and decided that all loot should be personal. What this means is that every player has a chance to loot a piece of gear from each boss they kill. However, Azerite gear, for some reason, isn't tradable as I write this, which means that if you already have a piece of gear, the most important piece of gear, by the way, that drops off a boss, you cannot trade it to your friends or people in the party. This is absolutely stupid and something that needs to be changed if they're actually going to keep it this way. So then, how do the classes feel in this expansion? A lot of them, in my opinion, feel kind of clunky when compared to how they felt in Legion. This is largely in part due to the removal of the legendary items that dynamically changed how each class played, and honestly I wish a lot of those traits would have just been added to the classes by default. What I mean by clunky is that classes play a lot slower and don't feel mechanically solid. A lot of classes have a lot of waiting time, or RNG, and I'm looking at you, Enhancement Shaman, which wasn't an issue with the legendaries in Legion. It honestly feels like a step backwards and not forwards as far as design goes. I know this is something that was supposed to be addressed by the whole Azeroth trait system, but that's not the case at current, and it's just something that everyone has to live with for now. I feel a class should be great and enjoyable as a baseline and not require gimmicks to fix it. I encourage anyone who has an issue with their class to go and speak up on the forums, give constructive criticism, and hopefully get something fixed in the future. BFA also added a new scenario-like activity called Expeditions, themed around securing Azeroth on remote islands. You and 2 other players embark out into an island setting where the entire goal is to collect more material than the opposing faction team. The basic idea is to kill NPCs, complete quests, and complete random events that happen to get an edge over your opponents. These are also somewhat decent way to grind Azeroth and power up your amulet, and you do get pets and random things for completing them at times. There's a PvP mode version of it, which is incredibly fun, but I can only see most people doing the normal, heroic, and mythic versions of the PvE. These genuinely also feel kind of rushed or an afterthought. They really don't give a lot of reward, and some of the islands have massive balance issues as far as how to win fastest goes. They're not a bad addition, but I wouldn't say that they're great, and I'm curious to see what they do with them in the future. So then, where do I stand score-wise with BFA and the WoW expansion as a whole? As I said, I'm going to break it up into 3 separate categories, so let's give a final score for each one. The audio and visuals for BFA were great, leading me to give them a score of 9 out of 10. The only thing they could have improved upon would be the animations and effects for every class and every ability, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. The leveling experience was not the greatest, but it wasn't awful. Overall, I'd have to say it was only slightly above average and barely earning a 6 out of 10 for me. It should have been more tied into the theme of the expansion, but it wasn't, and the quests themselves could have been a lot more interesting. And finally, the innovation and gameplay changes get a 4 out of 10 for me. They made no major effort to redesign or change anything drastic, and the things that they did end up adding just feel like chores. They're not terribly awful, but they're to me definitely not what I would consider fun or enjoyable. This can only get better in the future with changes, but for now things like the Azeroth grind just feel like a chore, and I strongly dislike that. All in all, I'm going to end up giving the expansion a total overall score of 7 out of 10, with the audio and visuals holding it from going any lower than that. Also, to the people that are going to say, oh, you can't review the expansion entirely until raids, my response is that I can't wait 3 or more weeks for the game to get better, and this is a review of what the game is like to me at current, at launch. So should you purchase BFA? If you've played WoW in the past, I could say that you'll not feel ripped off in buying the expansion and playing through it to 120. As far as the new player experience goes, if you want to play with friends, I fully encourage it. But don't be coming into the game expecting to play any of the new races anytime soon. It's an overall decent expansion, but to me, not at all near the best one, and it might even be the weakest. Anyway guys, that's going to be it for this rapid fire review. If you liked the video, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already subscribed, do us a solid and hit that bell to get notifications for videos in the future. Until the next rapid fire review, this is Delrith, and I'll be seeing ya.